Okay, welcome back, everyone. A really warm welcome. Nice to see you again. It's been a few weeks since we gathered together in our virtual room, in our gathering and our situation of encounters, we like to call it. So this is session 4 of Mind in Life Europe's Core in Action program, semester 4. And we have the pleasure of diving into what promises to be a really juicy session with 3 really esteemed guests. And so we'll be focusing on improvising and by extension, moving. So before I pass the baton to Letitia, who will be hosting this evening for us, Hannah de Jager could unfortunately not join us this evening. So we're going to miss her this evening, but and we certainly can't fill her shoes. So this is worth mentioning ahead of time. But as Hannah has done for the last few sessions, I just wanted to maybe take a minute and a half and just invite us all to find a way of coming into a space of what we might call listening epistemology. So this is something that we've talked a little bit about so far this semester, and that will certainly come up in this session this evening. And so maybe we can just, to ground ourselves, if you want to just find a seat that's comfortable, you can close your eyes if you want, leave them open if you'd like, if you're more comfortable with that. But maybe we can, in the spirit of listening and invoking a sort of listening epistemology, we can maybe just start using our senses, starting with the senses, the sense of hearing. Maybe just tuning into what we might hear from the inside. Of the body, maybe the heartbeat, maybe the breath, maybe sensations, maybe our own thoughts. And then maybe extending that sensitivity, that sense of hearing, sense of listening to the environment. And maybe even what's beyond the immediate environment, extending a sense of listening to beyond what we can hear in the immediate space. And then maybe imagining what it might be to listen to the space in between. So whether it's in between all of us in the Zoom room or in between us and the listeners we have following on YouTube right now. Between us and the screen. So if you'd like, we can maybe just come back to this space and open our eyes. And with that sense of listening to the in-between, or however you like to think of that, maybe we can get started. And Letitia, I can pass the baton to you.
Yeah, thank you, Johanna. Thank you so much for this practice that I think that it's very appropriated for the session today, when we will be attuned to this space between us and this way of listening, also the silence and the other. So welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all after this time, after since the last session. So today, as Johanna said, it's the day of the verb improvising and moving. And I have the pleasure to introduce you our invited speakers. And so I will start with that, and then I will remind us all of the questions that are guiding us through the whole semester, the questions related to the participatory sense-making and this space between us. So today we are receiving Luc Beton, and Luc Beton is an atypical artist choreographer. He entered the world of dance first by studying martial arts and then received his dance training in New York and Germany. Starting in 2004, he embarked on an extraordinary adventure wherein he would invite birds and dancers on stage to improvise and engage in a poetic dialogue. This concept gave birth to 4 different pieces. La Confidence des Oiseaux, with crows, jays, magpies, starlings, and parakeets. Swan, with white and black swans. Light birds, with Japanese cranes. And Ainsi la nuit, with vultures, owls, and a wolf. His unusual body of work has received many accolades, including the distinction of Officier des Arts et Lettres from the French Republic. In parallel with his choreography career, Luc Beton has long had an interest in contemplative practices, notably Zen and Vipassana meditation, which he has studied in France, New York, and Japan. From 2015 onward, he has collaborated with Dr. Jean-Gérard Bloch with the diploma granting program at the University of Strasbourg, Medicine, Meditation, Neurosciences. With such projects, he has been able to practice and enact the idea of letting be, in the sense of restoring each participant, human or non-human, to its own freedom of expression. So, Luc, thank you very much for being with us, for accepting our invitation today. Our next invited speaker is Scott Brewer. So Scott is a classical pianist and a piano teacher for many years. He's in America, living in Paris since the late 80s, and he's also a language teacher with experience in teaching English as a foreign language, German, and also theory of language teaching. He received his Bachelor of Arts on French language and literature at Columbia University, New York, and a Master of Music on Classical Piano Studies at the University of Southern California, Los Angeles. And he completed his doctoral thesis in educational sciences at Université Paris 10, Nanterre, in 2006. So Scott, thank you very much for being with us. And later, also for Luc and Barbara, you can complete your bios. And we are very happy to have you here with us today. So thank you for accepting our invitation and being here with us.
Thank you, Letitia.
And finally, our next invited speaker is Barbara Bogatin. And she's a cellist in the San Francisco Symphony. She's chamber music player and educator in the field of mindfulness training for musicians. In 35 years of practicing insight meditation, she has integrated the embodied knowledge this contemplative work nurtures into effective methods for improving instrumental practice and performance. Along with her husband, neuroscientist Clifford Saron, she has led workshops on meditation and music practice called The Buddha, the Brain, and Bach. At Spirit Rock Meditation Center, the Esalen Institute Stanford Symposium for Music and the Brain, Telluride Compassion Festival, UCS Center for Mindfulness Science, and South Africa Conference of Mindfulness, the Ecology of Mind and Matter Symposium in Todi, Italy, and the Nirakara Institute in Madrid, Spain. She received her Bachelor and Master of Music degrees from the Juilliard School in New York. So Barbara, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today for this discussion. So just before passing the word to our invited speakers, I would like to remind us all of the questions that are guiding us in this semester. And just to start a bit the conversation between us. So the first question is, tell us something about intersubjective expertise in your practice. It's a huge question, but it is at the starting point of the participatory sense-making theory. And the idea is that everyone has intersubjective experience. We are all experts by virtue of being human. And each of you, on top of that, have particular intersubjective experiences in your work as choreographer, as musician, as professor, as an artist, as educators, and so on. So we'd like to invite you all to speak about your practices in terms of these intersubjective experience that you already have, that you already see in what you are doing. And also, if you could, talk about also the questions that still are present. So in regard to these expertise that you see already, is there opening to improve? Are there areas of friction, of tension, of quest that remaining in your practice? And so the second question, the second block of questions is what is at stake for you as practitioners? And this is also a huge question, but you can talk about that in different levels. So in a meta level, for example, methodological questions related to pedagogical practices, how to do research or participatory research, or also how this question manifests itself directly in practice, so in concrete experiences in your daily lives. So what matters to you? What is at stake for you as choreographer, as musician, as teacher, as you engage with and interact with the audience, with the students, with collaborators, with birds? So these are the questions that are the starting point for our discussion. So I would like to invite you, Barbara, to talk about a little bit of your practice with these questions in mind. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Letitia. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody today. And so Letitia gave you some of my background, and I thought I would just add a little bit more so that you have some understanding of how I got involved with Mind and Life and with all of these issues, because I really had no training in psychology, philosophy, or cognitive science. I went to a traditional music conservatory, the Juilliard School in New York, where I spent most of my time learning my instrument, practicing, and studying the techniques and traditions of the past. But I was very fortunate that early in my career, I went on a blind date with a neuroscientist, some of you know Cliff Sarin, and we began a conversation about music and the mind and ways of knowing and brain science and contemplative practice and many other things that has now been ongoing for about 40 years. And we've integrated this conversation into our professional lives in developing a workshop that explores the intersectionality between Buddhist meditation, neuroplasticity, and music practice and performance. And at this point, in addition to my full-time job as a cellist with the San Francisco Symphony, I also have begun teaching mindfulness for musicians seminars, often to conservatory students in training, so that I can help them with some of the benefits of meditation, because for my very first retreat, I recognized the complementarity between meditation practice and music practice. And over the years, these two types of practices have very much informed and helped each other. I wish I had had this kind of training when I was starting out in my professional life. It would have been very helpful. But just as the meditation felt kind of familiar to me from my own lived experience as a musician, when I was reading Hannah's papers about participatory sense making, I instantly recognized that based on my 50 years of playing music with other musicians in chamber ensembles and in orchestras, it resonated very deeply on so many levels. And so I'd like to just get the conversation started by talking about some of the ways in which playing in chamber ensembles and playing in orchestras is a beautiful illustration of all different types of participatory sense making. So when I talk about chamber ensembles, that's basically a small group of musicians, say between 2 and 12, who play together without any conductor. And it can be in any genre. In classical music, we call it a chamber ensemble, but it could also be a rock band. It could be a jazz improv group, or like my son has a bluegrass band of 4 people that play together on the weekends. And all of these ways of playing involve a lot of the same skills of interaction. And the music could be fully composed, as it is with classical music, or it could be improvised around a melody that's already composed, or it could be fully improvised. We have the same issues of listening to each other, responding to each other, and spontaneously transforming the performance based on those interactions with each other. With this reciprocity, our worlds are synchronized and shaped by each other. And in order to do this, we have to have a huge tacit knowledge that we all share, and a lot of unspoken understandings and agreements. We have to know the style of each composer, the emotions that the composer is trying to express. And this shared understanding is really the essence of co-moduality. And that works for all the genres of music. The individuals in a group kind of self-organize as we play, and it demands a very high-level, practical, connecting know-how. So when I talk about in classical music, we have to have an understanding of the sensibility of each composer. For instance, just as an example, Beethoven, if we're playing a Beethoven string quartet, it'll have a heavier, weightier bow stroke and maybe more accents and attacks on certain notes. Whereas if you're playing Mozart or Schubert, you'll have a lighter touch with a less intense vibrato, perhaps. And every composer has his or her own stylistic, interpretive ways of expressing themselves and expressing their particular musical language. So as we listen to each other in a chamber ensemble, we have to have tremendous flexibility in terms of leadership and following. Normally, the first violinist in a small chamber group would be the de facto leader, and they will lead by nodding, by breathing, by giving looks, by the way their body moves. So it's a full multi-sensory kind of awareness. We have to listen with our entire bodies and have a tremendous amount of awareness of what each other is doing visually and orally, a kind of knowing in connection. And when we play in a small group, generally, it's the motoric voice that will establish the tempo and keep the rhythm going. In a rock band or a jazz group, you always listen to the drummer to understand where you are in terms of the time and the meter of the piece. So sometimes you're listening, sometimes you're following, and sometimes you're just letting be, which you mentioned so beautifully at the beginning. And when everything is really clicking together, something emerges that is not verbally reportable, but is knowable. And this is also very true when playing in an orchestra. That's something that I've been doing for my entire career, starting with my elementary school orchestra when I was about 10 years old. And now I've been in the San Francisco Symphony for almost 30 years. And there have been many other orchestras in between those two. So I'm very familiar with working with conductors who are giving the nonverbal communication to hold 100 people all together. In fact, at one point I tried to count them up, and I estimate that I've played with over 1,000 different conductors over the years. So many people are probably familiar with what a conductor is doing non-verbally, waving his or her arms around on the podium. And the obvious things are establishing the beat pattern and the tempo and cueing different instruments when it's time for them to come in, affecting the balance in real time. And all of these are kind of the sort of basic lowest level of responsibilities of a conductor, but truly the most important part of the job is to show the expression and the emotion that the composer is written into their music through their face, their body, their gestures, all of their motions, and to inspire the musicians by their musical understanding and their communicative power. Many pieces, most pieces, in fact, surprisingly, could be played just fine without a conductor by a professional orchestra. But the best conductors add a level of emotional connection and organic understanding of the meaning underneath the notes that is able to join 100 musicians in a common aesthetic and musical purpose. And with this spontaneous creation in real time, when everyone is feeling the music together, that's when we say the magic happens on stage. And it's a complete full body, full being, participatory, sense-making experience, which we feel like almost we have a group mind as we are aware of ourselves, while at the same time allowing ourselves to be affected and transformed by engaging with the others. So as a perfect example of that, I'd like to play a short, very short 2-minute video. And this is a video that to me so beautifully expresses the concept that Hannah describes in her paper, Human Knowing Through the Lens of Loving. You'll see the great American composer Leonard Bernstein conduct a movement of a Haydn symphony, the fourth movement of Symphony number 88 with the Vienna Philharmonic. And I was very lucky to see Leonard Bernstein conduct many times when I lived in New York City. And I had the great privilege of working with him, playing in an orchestra when he was conducting several times in the last few years of his life. And I consider these to be the highlights of my professional career. I could talk for hours about those experiences, but that maybe for another time. So in this video, this is towards the end of his life when he didn't have nearly the vigor that he expressed earlier in his life. And if any of you have seen the movie called Maestro that Bradley Cooper recently made and starred in about Leonard Bernstein, there's a segment in that movie where Bradley Cooper, as Bernstein, is conducting a movement of a Mahler symphony and uses tremendous gesticulations and movements and jumping and sweating and full body expression of all of this incredible intensity. So that was the youthful Bernstein. That's not what you're going to see in this video. This is much later in his life when he was suffering from emphysema and couldn't do a lot of motions and had to really curtail his movements. Nevertheless, what he was able to express in his being, as you'll see in a moment, really is the essence of knowing through the lens of loving and of the essence of simply becoming the music. And he himself, Bernstein, has a wonderful quote, which I love, which I will end with, which is, "Music can express what words cannot. It can name the unnameable and express the unknowable." So with that, now enjoy Leonard Bernstein and all of his expression.
Thank you, Barbara. Oh, yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you, Barbara, for
Thank you.
this
Every time I see
fantastic
that, I
review.
tear up. It's so touching and so beautiful.
Yeah, it's really, really beautiful, and it's difficult to find the words, the proper words to describe. So thank you. And yeah, it's beautiful. I'd like to invite Luke also to jump in and to talk about your work that
Yeah.
it seems to
So
me that
just a word about this face dance, as was the soul of music, really. And
yeah,
his face was as the entire body and entire body of the orchestra. I like this paradox between the micro and macro. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you
yeah,
very much.
so subtle also the gestures, they are minimal and at the same time so expressive.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
the more
less
Go
is
ahead.
more. So
Yes.
yeah.
But in this case, less is more than enough also.
Yeah. Yeah. So Barbara, when you teach for musician, mindfulness for musician, do you have a special guidance for musician in your guidance of mindfulness, specific guidance for musician?
I do, and I sort of separate it into different domains in terms of the practice, sort of the technical practice. I break down practice into 4 components, and I'll just very quickly give you the truncated version. So it's the first element of, because often when we practice, especially with students, you're just repeating and repeating over and over. And if you are at a conservatory and you walk by all the practice rooms, there's a lot of fast playing. People want to practice it as fast as they can because, of course, you have to play things very fast. But I encourage them to slow down the practice so that you can really break down the elements of practice as the best way to improve and to encode the different changes that you want to make. So it's observation and aware of how you're playing. And then the second component is analysis to really figure out what it is that's holding you back from what the sound that you want to create. And then once you've analyzed what you need to do, you have to make an alteration. So the third component alter something, make a change. And then once you've determined what is going to improve the practice, then it's repetition with awareness. So those 4 individual components of awareness, analysis, alteration, and repetition are repeated many, many, many times, sometimes in a few seconds, and sometimes it can take 30 minutes to do that in one passage. And this is the way that we can improve, by really slowing down our physical motions, slowing down our thought processes, and becoming aware of what we're doing and what we want to do differently. So in terms of the technical elements of practical practice, I break that down. And then in terms of, sometimes I'll teach about working with performance anxiety, how to find your calm center through meditation and bring that calm space forward when you perform. So those are a few of the ways.
Nice. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Barbara. And I would like to invite Luke too to talk about your practice. And I just one thing that I forgot to comment at the beginning of our session, something that we were discussing in the previous session and in the preparation for this one, is that we like to embrace what you are telling us. So listening, being present, and something that here for us is a challenge is the chat. Sometimes I have difficulties to follow at the same time what is going on in the conversation and the chat. We would like to say that we will leave the chat open, but also we'd like to integrate what is going on there in our conversation and invite people to the conversation too. And we'll do that after the break and invite those who want to comment or ask questions to us to just raise their hand and to ask the question or the comment. And also for those who prefer to write, you can write in the chat and we can read your question out loud, just to leave these notes. And Luc.
Yes. So maybe the first could be to see my little video that speak without work about what I was speaking about, letting be, laisser être. That was like I was working for 20 years with dancers and birds and living dancers on stage. And so I discovered a kind of new language, but guided not by the fascination of the bird, but by the relationship between the bird, another non-human being, and the dancer, a human being dancer, and the idea of writing a performance with beginning, a middle, and the ending. So the main purpose was a relationship, the interrelation between all this. And I was fascinating in a way by bird because they seem to be so close for us, for me, because they are part of my dream, part of my surrounding. Like here today, I can see the bird flying. But in another hand, they are so far because they are not mammal. They are from dinosaurs, no? So very far from us. So in a way, very close and very far. And I really appreciate the paradox. And so that was a starting point for this kind of poetic way I was following for 20 years. So maybe you can start the video if possible, and we
Yes.
can have an idea of this.
Thank you.
Merci. So that's it. So that video was made for a gallery, artist gallery, and it's made from 3 different pieces, not the last one. So that's why it's the videast logic, no, in the composition.
Yes, so it is wonderful. Look, thank you very much.
Mm.
And there
So
are so many questions and
yeah,
also connections to what Barbara was saying about the
yes,
conduction and
yeah.
the subtle
And
movements.
and here we don't know sometimes who is the conductor. If we
Yeah,
can
who is
say.
conducting who?
Yes,
Yeah.
Is it the bird? Sometimes, of course, sometimes it's the bird, because the timing of the birds is very different from the human timing. Sometimes they can
Mhm.
stay very still for quite a long time, but even still, it's they are full. Ils remplissent totalement l'espace.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
we-
and so we are, as a human, we are used to always speak, always move. And with birds, I learned to stop also, no? The immobility and how
Mhm.
the silence is full of meaning. The
Mhm.
silence of sound, the sounds of movement. And most of this bird, I got them in eggs, you know? So
Okay.
ils ont éclos.
Mhm.
You say
Mhm.
éclos
They
in
are
front of us.
born
Yeah, in front of us. And so we
of the
started to
eggs in
speak
front
and
of us,
speak with them inside, even inside the eggs and out.
inside the eggs. Okay. So it's there are so many fascinating questions also related to the language, which leads me to our next invited speaker to
Yeah.
also talk about his work. And so Scott, please
Scott.
join us and
Okay,
talk about
with
your
pleasure.
work too.
Thank you, Letitia. Yeah, and hello, everyone. And once again, thank you for letting me be part of this amazing session. I've just been blown away by what's already been shared, mesmerized. And what I think is so interesting, just as a first reaction, is just when we think of the notion that kind of was at the heart of what was kind of on the slide was improvisation. When we think this whole idea of improvising, and how that kind of relates to, you know, the performance of the Haydn Symphony, of course, conducted by Bernstein, which to some extent, you know, when you think, what does it mean to improvise? And when I was first actually thinking that I was being invited to be a specialist about the topic of improvisation as a classical musician, and language learner and instructor and teacher trainer, I thought to myself, oh gosh, I don't feel so qualified necessarily in a way, because I don't think of classical music as being someone who improvises in music, if you see what I'm saying. And then I decided to go and check actually kind of what does improvisation mean etymologically. There's this little dose of etymology sometimes helps you broaden your perspective on what a word actually means. And so I checked out improv, and it sort of has to do with what's unforeseen in that way. And then I thought to myself, well, yes, actually, every time an orchestra begins to play a Haydn symphony, for example, and it is absolutely, it's an act of creation. It was being emerging for the first time with all the unique, um, yeah, all the productions of meaning that is coming through the individuals and the collective entity. It's just, yeah, so I thought to myself, yeah, actually, that is something that characterizes every act of classical music, and I thought to myself, yeah. And then I also just was thinking a little bit about my own story as a musician and language teacher educator, and how, in a way, yeah, kind of improvised, you know, my own life in a way from stage after stage, you know. Just to fill in with some biographical elements, I did start out in my youth training quite seriously as a pianist, classical pianist, and then discovered foreign languages also. I come from a part of the United States where you know, I never was exposed at all to foreign languages as a child, but I was able to start learning French at the age of 14. And it was an amazing discovery for me with a very good teacher who made, of course, a huge difference. And anyway, so yeah, I took these joint domains that I really love, music and language, and that's kind of how I've kind of improvised my life. Now living in Paris for the last 34 years, where I keep up my work as a classical pianist, playing chamber music a lot, as Barbara mentioned, with small ensembles sometimes, trios, quartets, quintets. I've been giving piano lessons all these years for almost 50 years now. And after being a language teacher myself, I decided to move in to the area of language teacher education. And so that's what I do after I got my PhD. In 2006, I moved into teacher education. And my connection with Enaction, if I can just say a few words about that, was really when I was when I was getting into, let's say, doing some research and asking real questions about, I guess we could say, the development. That's maybe what I want to bring in response to the question of my, well, we asked here what our expertise, intersubjective expertise might be. I was thinking that maybe it just has to do with a kind of theory of practice that I've tried to develop in my own life. As a practicing musician, as a practicing linguist, because I still enjoy learning languages, but perhaps also really specifically with how I accompany other people on these journeys of learning these skills, because I'm really interested in the developmental perspective. How do human beings get good at these things? And what roles do we play when we try to mediate those processes, and that we intervene in their lives? And there again, of course, the question of value, ethically. In French, we have a word, déontologie. Deontologically, we sort of say in French sometimes with respect to, we're accompanying them. And so in connection with this theoretical idea of enaction that I first encountered when I went back to school at the age of 36 and started to say, oh, I want to do research on the topic of language learning and acquisition. And I met a researcher who actually kind of threw a huge idea. Actually, I think Amy knows this gentleman. His name's John Stewart. And he was at the University of Compiègne, University of Technology de Compiègne, up north of Paris. And he said something to me which really just, he was like, I don't think you can teach a language. He sort of said something like this, you can't teach a language. And I sat right there, as a language teacher, I thought, oh my word, you can't teach it. I started to reflect on that. What does that mean? And then it tied in with experiences I had as a musician, and of course realizing that no one's ever going to really play the piano for you, or you're never going to learn in your stead. You've got to really do it in a way yourself. So anyway, to sort of with language learning, there are so many paradoxes that I found were just so powerful and that I had to start to wrestle with as a teacher. Perhaps one of the most important is just this relationship between what's inside you and what's outside you. Because what languages are what we call the endogenous processes versus the exogenous processes, and how these things have to come from within. And at the same time, you as a teacher, you are one of those influences which is coming from without, and you are making these differences, but you need to be respectful of what ultimately needs to be a primacy of the endogenous in the learner or in the emerging musician, the emerging linguist. It has to be endogenous in a way, but how we accompany them. So I was really interested in that inside-outside. Maybe also, if you can relate to what I'm trying to say, that when it comes to teaching and instruction, we're often in this outside-inside sort of paradigm of thinking, how do we put knowledge inside people's brains in some way? There's a sort of outside-inside movement of teaching and instruction versus an inside-outside. How do teachers work to bring things that are already in the learner so that we move towards verbs such as cultivate, that young people learn to grow their minds, they learn to cultivate their minds, that it's not so much about us instructing their minds and trying to learn for them or like sort of in lieu of them, and preempting. As a good friend of mine once said, that sometimes we confiscate the act of learning from the learners themselves. And I was really then worried about, that kind of thing. How does school not confiscate the realities of learning and the adventure of learning and just the joy of learning, like it so often does? And another paradox that really hit with language is, of course, this relationship we have to how we as human beings come into language at the beginning of our lives and how we relate to language later in our lives, right? There's this thing that we talk about as linguists, we talk about the critical period around puberty, when all of a sudden language learning is not at all like it was earlier. When we were kids, obviously, we kind of just merge into this language that it happens, quote unquote, naturally, right? We're not even aware of it happening. Versus after the age of maybe 13, 14, 15, when I first, for example, started learning French, okay, yeah, the nature of the learning undertaking is very, very different. And I think we could sort of describe language learning maybe as a venture that goes beyond what comes naturally. And there's this relationship between what we kind of need to make happen if we want to become someone who speaks a new language or what we call an additional language in their lives later, versus what you have to make it happen versus let it happen. But with language learning, we also have a lot of these metaphors. Again, this is just sometimes the power of metaphor, what we talk about immersion, right? To learn a language through total immersion. This is where you're going to go into a country or into a world or even into a classroom. And the only language that will be spoken is the target language. And that is going to be this very powerful outside in sort of thing. People will absorb the language because, of course, the metaphor is a sponge, right? You'll pick it up. And of course, I have, as a teacher and a learner, I mean, I've experienced lots of classrooms where it's been quite the opposite. Sometimes being in an immersion environment can almost be very anxiety-inducing when you don't feel like you understand anything. And there can be problems with this. We see many, many teenagers in many language classrooms who are just saying, like, I don't understand anything the teacher's saying. The teacher refuses to speak my language, and actually it's a very negative kind of experience. So I don't know if that's making sense what I'm trying to say here, but these are just questions that I started to wrestle with, and the theory of enaction gave me a really powerful tool to start to try to, I don't know if it would be to straddle sort of these paradoxes in a way, or try to subsume them in some way. But it really gave me a very, it really reinvigorated my thinking about how do we position ourselves, make ourselves available in a very complete sense of the word there to accompany people, to be attuned to when we are working with them. I find this in how I try to work with my students, whether it be actually in the language classroom or in the context of their learning to become teachers at the university, where we work with them actually in their own questioning process as future teachers, because they do master's degrees with me, for example, and all my colleagues at the university. So we try to accompany them in raising their own questions about the teaching learning experience. And then when I work with piano students privately, it's always just a constant process of discovering and trying to, I look at it all as really, we're trying to solve problems, right? We get together and concretely, we're really trying to troubleshoot, they come in and the problems, quote unquote, the problems, the challenges, the obstacles, the constraints, right? That we're trying to somehow work with, and that at the same time enable us to learn. It's fascinating because we're at the same time in an idea of interpretation of music, of something that comes from the heart, something that comes from the mind, and the analysis, as Barbara mentioned earlier, the analysis. And at the same time, it's physiological. It's just something that's just like, how do we make use of our body in a way that's going to be more comfortable? It's sort of a choreography of course, in piano playing, it usually tends to be, we focus on the hands, but of course, it's the whole body. It's the whole thing. But playing from the whole back, for example, and the whole body. But we do focus obviously on what our hands are doing on the keyboard. So I think I can stop there. I've spoken probably more than enough, but that's just to give you an idea that maybe what I can bring is just this more interest that I've had in the development of such skills as language learning, music.
Yes, and there are a lot of unsuspected connections between learning languages and music, and also all these connections between what you were saying, these paradoxes, the inside, outside. And I think you all talked about this in a certain sense. Barbara mentioned this a bit paradoxical experience of being ourselves and being transformed by the presence of others. playing
Yeah.
together. Luc also talked about these in between, being more interested in the relation than in the birds themselves. So what is going on in this paradoxical space of the inside outside? And also these,
Yeah.
it's very interesting what you mentioned about these improvising and the unforeseen, this unpredictability that is also present in what you all talked about in your practices. So
I
thank
could
you.
just say one little thing, and then I'll shut up for just a second. But what I thought was so interesting about the contrast between Barbara's video and what we saw with Bernstein, and obviously, and including all the things that Barbara shared with us before she had us look at the video, and Luke's video, and what we watched there, which was just so mesmerizing, and that interaction between was in a way the Bernstein Haydn symphony. You can see how that, that I want to say to some extent how that is just, that was this group of wonderful musicians directed by Bernstein playing Haydn, and obviously was a unique, one of a kind performance that emerged, but how it was so the fruit of just really, really, I want to say deliberate intentionality, if I could say that. I mean, there's just an intention to produce that performance, and then it comes forth and it's brought forth with all the magic in between the constraints, be it how those constraints give way to this amazing, free, creative performance. So I always find that. And then, but with Luke's, I found that it's what's the interstice. Can we say the interstice between, obviously the human intentionality, the exercise of the human agency, artistic agency that's there with the artists, and yet that total fortuity and unpredictability of the birds, and how those two intersect, because there was something about those performances in Luke's video where it was just this intersection of, something rehearsed on the one hand, so rehearsed, and yet that totally amazing intersection between that human, sort of agentic dance performance with that presence of the animal intelligence right there, that was just so it's just amazing. Never seen anything like it.
I wonder, Letitia, if it makes sense, maybe we can also circle back to Luc a bit more and hear more of his story and process, more from A to Z, because we haven't really gotten a sense of the arc of the creative process. I mean, I imagine I'm not alone in wanting to hear more about what the process looks like, both in this tension between the letting be, but also giving shape or letting these pieces take shape over time. Maybe you can give us a little bit more of a story of that journey.
That's a long journey, in fact, yes. So I had once the intuition, the very, very strong intuition that we could have on stage dancers, free dancers and free birds, because for me they are kind of the same family, they are so fragile, so beautiful, they can, anyway. And so it was like a 2 minutes intuition and 20 years of working, because I had to understand how to create this in between, possible pour les deux, possible for both without injuring anyone. And so it was a long process, very about technical, about the technical aspect around this is very heavy. You can imagine on stage rehearsing and everything. But each time I had from the beginning, when the bird was very, very young, I realized that the bird was choosing one dancer and the dancer choosing one bird. So a kind of relationship was rising suddenly, jour après jour, day after day. And so instead of having an idea of mise en scène, of a choreography, I stopped being a choreographer, but on just being there, looking for what was happening day after day, months after months. And one day, some dance sequence between them was already there. I just had to compose what was already there in front of me. So that was not really my decision sometimes, Of course, after I had a composer problem to make it logical and to make it in a frame, dans une œuvre, hein, a piece. But every day, every night, something happened that I was not expecting, you know. And so my job at that moment was really to look at the first time what is happening. And very often what we could call a mistake was really perfect. And so I had to convince the dancer that was not a mistake, but that was a new way, a new door for the relationship, you know? And so that's why all the performances stay alive until the last one. It was we had never repetition of the same piece. The musician was on stage or backstage, near the stage, and he was playing because sometimes the sequences was shorter or longer. It depends of the weather. It depends of the audience. It depends on many things, you know. And so that was really heartbreaking for me every night. And now my pleasure now is to try to transmit what I discovered there, you know, this fragility, this incertitude. Uncertainty, is that English also? You know?
Yeah, uncertainty.
Yeah. And so Edgar Morin was asking a few years ago, what is
Uncertainty? Yeah.
Edgar Morin? Yeah, you understand now? It's a scientist in France, very old man now. He's 102 years old. Anyway, he was asking what is uncertainty, and everybody was thinking what about uncertainty? And if at the end he said uncertainty is relation, because a relation is never sure. Every second, every year, every day of the relation, we have to make it new. And so I was my word with this bird was incertitude, no? L'étoffe de l'incertitude. And now I'm also asking, is there a pedagogical way to creativity and to intuition? That's why that's a bridge with mindfulness. Est-ce qu'il y a une pédagogie de la créativité? Est-ce qu'il y a une pédagogie de l'intuition? That's my
Is
my
there a
question.
pedagogy of creativity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That I love that question, and that circles back to something that Scott was talking about that I think about a lot, especially when I'm teaching younger musicians, the inside and the outside, because what I see is often musicians, especially young people, they play their instruments out of this tremendous love of music and creating sound and connection with others, and yet often the training kind of stifles that creativity, the training that we think we have to do in order to be able to play our instruments so well, so that what often happens is what is inside, they have inside to express, is hard to get that outside. And that is this crucial challenge that you talk about, a way to access creativity and to even to teach personal expression. And one of the things that I have found in my own exploration of this over the years, when I do metta meditation, I find, for instance, if I do a week-long meditation retreat focusing on metta, which is loving kindness meditation, wishing goodwill toward yourself, towards others, hours and hours, days of this puts you into a space of a real heart-centered vulnerability that you act out of in every part of your life once you leave that retreat setting. And so I work with students using metta meditation, even for 10 minutes in the practice room. And it becomes a way of embodied expression, or embodied centering your being. Because as Scott said, when we play our instruments, this is our bodies, and our bodies have to hold the music, and they have to hold the expression and be able to communicate that, as Leonard Bernstein did so magnificently, just with his face and with his smile and with a gentle swaying. He could show all of these nuances. And so if a student who's maybe playing technically well, but very stiffly and clearly not getting their expression from their heart out to their listeners, having them get into their bodies and do deep breathing and metta, loving kindness meditation, and able to play then from that space. You find that a whole world of expression opens up, and the student, in a way, feels free to transcend the technical elements and play from the heart, something we all want to do. Every musician aspires to that, and certainly the best ones, the ones that you pay a lot of money to go hear, the Yo-Yo Ma or the Chick Corea or the Wynton Marsalis, the great musicians, or the Leonard Bernstein when he was alive. They have access to this emotional center, and they have the ability to play from that center and get outside to the listeners what they have inside to express. So for me, and in my training of mindfulness for musicians, that's a core element of helping the students access what they have inside, and find a way to express it in their instruments.
Yeah, thank you. And I try to do kind of the same, but with our own body. That, for example, my elbow has to be in kind of meditation with my other elbow or with my head. And so there is, even in my orchestral body, there is a relationship. And so sometimes I like to teach people to let the elbow tell his own story with his shoulder, with the other shoulder, with the knee, with the space inside, with the space outside. So it's kind of relation that in a way, if all my body can be, for example, in my hand or in my finger or in my whole body or in the body of all the group of the dancer. So it's playing with a scale, micro, macro. That's kind of orchestral. And after that question is, who is conducting? Who is conducting who?
Yes. Which is somehow related to this paradox that Scott was talking about, the outside, inside. Because when we see the birds or we see the style of a conductor, we see that it's not about imitate. You are not imitating the bird, but there is something in common, a common ground in a certain manner in the orchestra or dancing with birds. That is this in between. It's not something that it's coming from the outside.
You were asking me? No, sorry.
Yeah, it's not really a question, but something that I was thinking about with you, because when Scott was talking about how we learn a language, that is something it's already there. And we see and we listen to your practices, like Barbara talking about the being in an orchestra and feeling the style of composer or the conductor, or we see the dance with the birds, and we see that there are commonalities between the movements of the dancers, the human dancers, and the bird dancers. And we see there is not about imitation, but there is something common emerging.
Yeah. I guess we have a lot of in common with all the being on that earth, because we are on the same earth. No? We came from the same origin. So we are very close to the world. We are the world, in fact. So that's why it's possible to interact, I guess. Unless we discover another life somewhere else. Anyway. But it's a question of space and time, to give space and time the chance to laisser quelque chose émerger by itself. Et peut-être que maybe that was the kind of origin of the language, the speaking language also. That something emerge sometimes, and the sounds come, and the construction of the language. Many years ago, of course.
If I could throw something in here that I've just that again, sort of drawing on music and language and seeing them as sharing so like they share so much in terms of sense making and I don't know if it would be, let's say, messaging, like putting across messages that we can read, that everyone reads, of course, in their own way. But of course, they're so different because, like what Barbara said, and quoting was it who was it that you quoted just before you showed the video, Barbara?
Leonard Bernstein.
That was
Leonard
Bernstein
Bernstein.
himself. That
He
was
said,
Bernstein
music
himself.
can
Okay, right.
express what words cannot.
Exactly.
It can name the
Exactly.
unnameable and express the unknowable. Yeah.
Yeah. At the same time, like music is a kind of language, and yet it goes so far beyond what we usually think of as a language, right? And but what they do share, which I think is so interesting, is when speaking, we evoke these ideas of micro to the macro, right? Is that they do share this idea of very small elements, whether they be notes in music or what we call phonemes in language, les phonèmes, les petits sons, and then how they join together, right? They're assembled in these amazing sequences, this sort of sequential, and they become then just these larger structures of meaning, networks of meaning that then are put together, and they coalesce until we get these amazing discursive, right, levels of literature and symphonies and that can, of course, just impact us in terms of what they signify. And it's always been that interesting question of what they signify in some respects objectively, and yet what they signify obviously totally subjectively to the people who are reading them or listening to them. Yeah, it's just, I find that just such an amazing thing. How out of these little elements, right? These little elements, just this. But then it makes me think of the chart of those things we learned when we were kids in chemistry class, the periodic elements, how they bring that the whole world is just constructed out of elements, right? And it's just
That actually, Scott, that reminds me of something that I remember from a rehearsal with Leonard Bernstein when he was he could get very obsessive in moments about wanting something exactly a certain way, like how a dot has to be played in a piece of Beethoven. No, the dot has to be exactly like this, with this kind of an attack and this kind of a decay and this length. And then in the next moment, talking about that, I mean, that is the smallest element on a page of music, is a dot over a note.
right.
And then talking about the phrase that it was a part of and why that was such an important moment. And then in the structure of the whole movement of the piece, how this was the culmination of a big buildup, and then what that meant to Beethoven and who else was composing other music at that time in the world, around the world, and his understanding and appreciation. And this is why this is part of his genius and why he was able to totally become every piece of music that he was performing or conducting. So from the most micro level of the dot and the meaning of that dot through the entire picture of music being created in the world at that same time. And this is the levels that he held in his understanding and his being. And I mean, the magnitude of that way of thinking is quite exceptional. If we could all do that, it would be quite amazing. But to see it and to realize how even if there's one person who can hold all of those elements, as you so eloquently described, that is the challenge, to hold as much of that as we can and communicate whatever that essence bubbles up from that understanding.
Certainly. So I would like just to invite you all to have a 5-minute break. So just a quick moment to to break and to reflect, and we came back to take the questions and comments also from the participants that are listening us. So in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Great.
So welcome back, everyone. So after this short break, I think we have, all of us, so many comments and questions. And I would like to invite the participants to raise their hands and to join us in this conversation. So if anyone has comments or questions, please. So Matthew.
Hello, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. So one thing that came to my mind, again, as we've talked about the paradoxes that are surrounding participatory sense making. Some of them, one of the key ones that comes out, at least at the intersection of some of the techniques Barbara mentioned, and the directorial method of Luke, is this. So within meta and within the cultivation for better techniques playing an instrument, these are describable and interpersonal possibilities. Maybe there's a way that they could be also transmitted to a bird, but prima facie, the bird and the human's communicative methods are mediated, as it seemed in the show, they're mediated by food. And there's at least the way that hands were held, sometimes there were drops of food, sometimes there were things that were given, and then there was the possibility of a safe space. But nonetheless, I just want to focus in on the paradox that seems to be between individual persons cultivating methods of participatory sense making and interspecies lack of the possibility of consensual, like shared meaning. Yeah, I propose this as a problem. Any comments are welcome.
Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, a word that just springs to mind is just again the nature of the. I don't know if we could say that the events themselves, Matthew. I don't know if we could speak about sort of the constraints and resources that are inherent in those situations. They are so quite different, and yet at the same time we are dealing with constraints and resources and how they emerge, and those epistemological constraints that are there. I mean, and because just in terms of, like you're saying, what birds have a way of knowing the world that, and how they live in their ecological niche, which and the world they bring forth, and how then it interacts with our way of bringing our world forth. It versus a collectively human way of and all the individuals with their their repertoires, and then bring those together to produce a performance like an orchestral performance. I don't know if that resonates at all, but yeah, it's a very interesting continuum to think along. Yeah.
What I could say, c'est la notion d'effacement. How can you say effacement en anglais, en français, Scott? Effacement. Quand on
Sort of
dit
abstracting ourselves, on s'abstrait un peu en quelque sorte.
c'est ça.
To erase yourself, actually, to abstract.
Yes. So it's a paradox between presence and effacement. And in this movement, there is a possibility of understanding for myself and for my partner to understand something which is between us, not from me, not from him, him or her, but something arising in between, because I produce a movement of effacement, so I create a space that something else can arise.
Emerge.
And with mindfulness, so I can do it sometimes with myself, if I can say, no, to Sorry, I'm not very clever with the English word, even in French anyway.
Cool.
C'est ce mouvement, that is movement of creating a space where something can happen. Words, music, movement, writing, painting, I guess. That's the space of intuition and creativity, no? That, in fact, c'est une addition soustractive. How can you say that in English? It's une addiction soustractive.
Wow.
Extractive. Yeah. That's the paradox, isn't it? It's like, yeah.
It's a soustractive addition.
Yeah, it's extractive.
Subtractive addition.
It reminds me of even just in like sometimes linguistic production, we talk about inhibitory kinds of just when in terms of not doing something when we sort of maybe have a first reflection to do it, and this is sort of like, no, not doing, creating space, welcoming silence in a classroom sometimes. I'm just even thinking, is really creating that space for something to emerge that wouldn't emerge if the reactions are too sudden, too quick. It just resonates with that idea. Did Matthew want to say something again?
Yeah, Matthew. Yeah, sure.
Okay, I don't want to take up too much time, but the idea would then be by Luke that there is a participatory sense making possibility that might be a subtraction addition, which is interspecies possible, and therefore overcomes a paradox. It actually is not paradoxical in so much as there are techniques that are possible to be made upon this minimal dynamics of movement. So that's.
Okay.
May I, Letitia, just ask on that note, just a really quick follow-up question.
Sure.
Do you work with intentionality in the space? So you're talking about something which is manifest in physical space, a sort of making space, which I presume corresponds to something in the physical configuration of the space, but is there something also attitudinal or on the order of intention that you're also working with in that regard?
That's a question for me? Yeah. Or maybe.
For you and for all.
Yeah. I mean, with at least with birds and maybe with dancer, not having intention is creating the possibility to have attention and reaction, action. I mean, sometimes not without intention opens the way, opens the space for something. Even if my intention behind is there, but not so precise. I mean, for me, it's not so precise. It's more like a heart intention, no? A soul intention, rather than I will organize this to obtain this. It was just like poetic atmosphere in which I was, and so I had the intuition that I could bring this, I could bring him with her, I could do this, and something happened. His intuition is good, something happened, but not every time, of course, no. Sometimes we had to stop to understand that it's better not doing anything.
Yeah, I relate to that as well. For instance, I've done some work with free improvisation with an ensemble. And when you're doing that, you might have a certain intention, or you start with an intention. I'll play a melody that's going to be soaring, and you start, and then somebody responds to it. And if you are really listening deeply and allowing yourself to take in what you hear, your intention might completely disappear and you start doing something else in relation, because that really is sense making and interaction from the people around you and the sounds that we're working together to create. It's very spontaneously. And so it is a paradox, because you have a particular intention. And yet, if you're willing to give in to just the space of silence, as was said, the space of silence and allowing something to emerge, it's not always easy to allow yourself to get into that space. You really have to take a lot of risk. But it is a great source of creativity, and it's something to, I think, to try to cultivate in whatever way you can in your own body, whether it's through dance or through movement or through meditation, whatever way works to get into that space of freedom. It's great to be able to cultivate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. And thank you, Matthew, for the question. So, Kira, hi. Do you have a question, a comment?
Hi, good evening to everyone. Thank you for your sharings. Amazing. Look, I've seen some of small sketches of your pieces before, and the first thing I saw from you was the dance with the crows. And I remember that the first time I saw this dance, I was so touched, so moved. So it was so eye-opening for me, and what was possible, and the possibilities you are presenting there in this interaction, this dance interaction between human and non-human bodies. And my question is for all three, actually, if you want to have some thoughts about, I'm a dance artist, and I'm doing a PhD, and I'm researching attention, enaction, and improvisation. And if I think of what Pierre Vermege points out for us, that attention is the background or the fluctuation of cognition. It modulates consciousness and intentionality. Therefore, it would modulate the act of knowing. So knowing dance, knowing linguistic, knowing music, knowing improvisation. And I would like to know if any of you has any thoughts in the importance and how to use attention in your practices, like attentional gestures, like tracking, pause, landing, attentive acknowledgement, suspension, head direction, letting go. If you have any thoughts about this attention practices in relation to what you do in your specific fields. Thank you very much.
Who would like to go?
Go, Scott.
Oh, no, a word, and I'll just be very quick. The word that I might want to offer in response, Kieran, would be, I know that when I'm putting myself here now as a practicing musician, and when I'm working on a piece, and I just try to give myself, I always try to give myself things to focus on. I'm the quote about focus, different facets of musical production. There's so many things going on, and it's so many dimensions. And I just find that if I just give myself sometimes little criteria within the big tapestry of all the things that are going on, because it's a real, sort of all the pipes are going off at once in a way, but I give myself maybe one thing, and I move that around almost like a flashlight, in a dark room. I can move that point of focus around, and always give myself something to shoot for. Even when I'm practicing scales, I can think dynamics when I'm working on my scales. I want to get louder when I go up, or I want to get softer when I go up, or I want to have one hand doing something that the other hand isn't. And that really, really helps, hold the attention when you're doing things that from maybe, from a certain point of view, you could say is sort of fastidious and a bit tedious to do those things. But no, this really keeps it interesting, and even can make scales beautiful, for example.
Yeah, I agree with Scott completely. And for instance, when I'm working with a student, say, who has a very distracted mind, or let's say when I get to the performance, I just can't keep myself focused on the playing. I'm thinking about all these other things, which is a kind of way of expressing nerves or anxiety in performance. I do similar to, as you're suggesting, have them focus on one very specific thing, bring their attention back. For instance, if you're playing with another musician, say a cellist playing with a pianist, listen to the sound of the piano and bring yourself, whenever your mind goes away, just listen to the people next to you and try to blend your sound with that sound. And so you focus on something very, very specific. Or perhaps think about your arm weight as you draw the bow and how you want to have your instrument, the sounding box, resonate with the maximum amount of reverberation. And if you're focused on that and are practiced through whether it's meditation or other things that you might practice when your mind wanders, gently bring it back to the focus, to a very specific focus. And that can help a lot with maintaining attention in a way that helps you express what it is you're trying to express.
And for me, it's a bit the same for dancer, because in dance we are very often, we don't have a score, of course, we don't have a history where to place this piece that we are dancing, especially with bird, which is a lot of improvisé, c'est très improvisé. But we have three main straw. It's space, time, and energy. So I told my dancer to concentrate on space, if they, or on timing, or energy. And if they, and when they are very distracted, I told them to concentrate on their breathing, to stop moving, and just to discover the dancing of the breathing inside. Stop for a moment, and this dancing breathing, it's a new starter for the new movement. So, but every time a dancer moves, he's concentrated on a very simple thing, very simple. To look is very complex, but what he is doing for him every time, it's a very simple thing. Now I'm following, I'm trying to be in the dans le remous du mouvement and the flow of the movement, or I'm trying to be a bit before, or I'm trying to compress the space between him and me. I compress the story, or I open it, or I open myself, and tous les pores de ma peau, I open my skin to invite him. I invite him. I invite him, and the birds come, for example. Or I make a step away, and this step will attirer the bird, for example. Or in my heart, I just feel what the bird can do. What I open my heart to the bird, and after a moment, I can see that he's reacting of my heart, in fact. But anyway, every time it's very specific and very simple thing. Space, time, energy. Body.
Thank you. Merci.
Body, soul.
Thank you, Kiran, and thank you all. João?
Hi, are you listening to me?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. First of all, thank you very much. I'm loving listening to you, because to me, the one thing that the four of you are talking about, I would like first to remember how Leticia started talking about we are always experts by the virtues of being humans. Because something that I liked so much that Barbara talked about was this like common ground for being open to synchronize. That to me, one thing that the three of you are saying is, for some specific contexts, we have to have some skills to construct these common grounds in orchestra, in dancing, or speaking the same language. But we also have these common grounds for just because we just are humans and we are just living beings, that I think is something that Luke is working with the birds. And on this level, one thing that mainly when Luke make this differentiation between composing and choreographing, and I would like to listen to all of you about this, is I think the most difficult part is how this letting be could, how could we allow this letting be by the knowing that we have of the possibilities that this letting be can produce. Because to me, for example, this talk a lot about things of leadership, about how we construct communities and societies on this very micro level that you're talking about.
But we don't know, from my point of view, I don't know what the letting be is supposed to do to realize. I don't know. And because I don't know, maybe it happened. That's my.
A word that came to mind as I was hearing your question, Joel, is trust. I don't know if that just the notion of trust and awareness. Trust and awareness, I think, work really hand in hand in a certain way. And then it has a lot to do with this question of intentionality is just always kind of there, and suspension of intention, like suspending intention, which in itself is kind of an intention, if that makes any sense. I mean, when we kind of decide not to be intentional, we're kind of intending. But I mean, it's an interesting thing. We cognitively there's the idea of suspending. There's a choice that's made in some way, but it can be guided very intuitively and very much in sync with some other force that we are just open to and that we want to respond to, and that we literally want to dance with.
I think also that's the essential paradox of creativity, which is how do we manifest our intentionality, which we all have when we perform, when we dance, when we create something, and yet give it all up at the same moment to allow ourselves to be in the space for spontaneous arrival of new thoughts, new ideas. How do we allow ourselves to rest in that uncertainty?
With that risk.
That risk, and just have the trust that what will emerge is going to be a co-creation that will be maybe even more expressive of our original intention. This is in the artistic world, but I'm not sure if what you're talking about is bringing it forward into the other aspects of the world in terms of in communities or in bigger, larger public realms. I think we'll probably have to have some different language around it. But in terms of the creative world, it's definitely the paradox that we all sort of struggle with. Yeah.
That's maybe the gap between the creative world and the world, the technical world. And also, it's a way d'être à l'aise avec l'incertitude. Scott,
To be at ease with uncertainty, uncertainties.
Which is c'est notre étoffe, c'est l'étoffe de nos jours, l'incertitude.
That's your sort of your raw material in a way.
Yeah. Which is okay.
Un peu la matière première, c'est un peu votre, ou même pas. Non, l'étoffe,
c'est l'atmosphère dans laquelle on vit, quoi. C'est pas la matière première, mais l'ambiance.
L'ambiance, okay. The niche in which.
No, maybe.
You remember me a phrase of Beckett? Ever tried, ever failed, fail again, ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better.
Yes, that's it. Exactement. Exactement. But
Yeah.
it's very scaring to fail. And it's very scaring to understand that I cannot fail.
This phrase of Beckett appeared yesterday too when we were discussing this session. Joanna reminded us of this phrase too.
Good.
Very good. And thanks also, João, because you remembered me that at the beginning I said we are all experts in intersubjectivity because we are humans. Probably I should have added that birds too apparently are also quite experts. So I probably should have phrased that differently. So thanks very much, João, for your question. So Aida.
Thank you all for bringing up these wonderful topics, and they really go to the heart for me. I would like to share a personal experience, and actually some of you might have shared it with me last year at ESRI, at the Summer Research Institute of Mind and Life Europe, where Brother Paplin in the small temple in Pomaya, in this wonderful place, guided us into a meditation, and then asked us after maybe 20 minutes of meditation to, without any intentionality, just by being guided by our body, basically, to sing a note and to see whatever comes up. And whatever volume, pitch, tone, it was not important. And not to have the intention to make something beautiful, just be with the body and leave it, let it out. And what happened was that these 20, maybe 25 people in this small room, in this small temple, we were becoming an orchestra or a choir, but it was not like a choir, it was different. It was gorgeous and beautiful. And this moment, you know, he always instructed us to notice what the mind is doing from moment to moment, and to wait for the tone to kind of come out of itself without thinking about shall I not, what will I do. You know, really suspending any knowing and any intentionality and trusting in this awareness. Yeah. And it was just a co-creation, which was absolutely beautiful. And he didn't guide us or anything. There was no orchestration or conducting. And the ending happened in and of its own as well. And it was a beautiful experience. We did the same kind of thing with dancing outside then, with closed eyes, where he invited us to just touch each other and to guide ourselves through these people. And what happened was a beautiful dance between us. And I thought when I was listening to you, I thought how important this awareness and the trusting in the awareness is. And of course, you as musicians, as dancers, choreographers, living in this creative world, you probably are very embodied people. But most people who I meet on my day-to-day basis, in my day-to-day life, are quite disembodied. And you know, how can we form little exercises, maybe communal exercises like this one, which I was just describing, to bring people into their body, to teach them more an awareness of their body and their mind, which is one anyway, and open their heart and having this experience of co-creating. And it doesn't have to be an orchestra led by Leonard Bernstein, for which I would dream of, you know, being in that orchestra. But I think, you know, this beauty can be really experienced by everybody if we find ways to do these co-creation processes.
Yeah.
So this was more of a comment, and let me just add one more thing about the human knowing. The first session of this semester was opened by Hanne de Jager, and her ending was, we need a new epistemology of letting things be and letting people be. And I think this letting things be starts really in our mind. So letting this intentionality be, seeing the tension, of course, but letting the intentionality be and come to the body and let it out, like I described in this choir creation. Yeah, thank you. That was a long one. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, very nice. What sometimes I try to, with my student, or I tell them that all of us here in the room, we are 7 years old, not more. And from that, creativity and something else can arise. Now, 7 years, it's a nice age. Already a bit un peu grand déjà, we can understand, but we are much free that like adult. So the idea of being 7 years old for creativity is not good. It's good. Even with language, with a body, with a movement, with eccentricity. I don't have to, at that age, I don't have to pretend to be a choreographer, a man, or whatever. I'm just a little boy, 7 years old, like everybody. Yeah. 7 years old, creativity.
Thank you.
So if I could just, Luke's, what Luke just said just made me think of Bernstein. Bernstein up there. If I don't know if anybody else had the little flash thought, but I thought he could right there be just making faces at his grandchild, trying to,
Absolutely.
it was just so wonderfully childlike in what was emerging there. And of course, there he was with the Vienna Philharmonic, playing a Haydn symphony. But it was like child play in a way. It was wonderful. And of course, Haydn's music is very much that, isn't it? I mean, it's just this joyous, joking, sort of a wonderful, trying to provoke those emotions, whatnot. And I guess one thing I just wanted to maybe add, and then I'll is, sometimes I think one of the things that we really don't talk to ourselves about, to each other about, and certainly that we do not tell in school, okay, that we do not tell people, is the wonderful story of what language actually is. We do not share with kids growing up in our societies, just in general. And here this is not my idea. I'm taking this idea from a wonderful man named Neil Postman, if anybody's ever heard of Neil Postman. But he talks about how we are, our species. I mean, we're word weavers. We weave words and we create worlds. So we're the world makers and we're the word weavers. And it's just an amazing story about how our species, developed this amazing ability. And one of the guiding questions we had about improvisation is this idea of generativity and collaboration. And I just thought to myself, what is it that what we're doing right now? When we actually are using language language is so fundamentally generative, right? I mean, just in terms of the tools that it gives us to literally produce infinite utterances, infinite variety of things, and at the same time, where was I going with this? I was just thinking to myself, so in other words, that language, and then it's collaborative, right? We're doing it with each other all the time. And we're doing it with ourselves. I think it's wonderful how self-talk is just an amazing part of, I don't know about you, but I talk to myself all the time. but I mean, how we cultivate our use of language, how we exercise our agency through linguistic practices, and how we then use our linguistic bodies and our musical bodies to really constantly interact. I mean, and we don't get into we don't share this enough with kids. We just take language at the surface and we stay at the surface of things, and we don't get into the diachrony and like diachronie, like where language is from and how it's just part of our history and what we are, and that what it's going to be depends so much on how we decide to go forward. Anyway, enough said.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we are approaching, unfortunately, the end of the session. We could still going on. There are so many questions. But yeah, I just wanted to remind everyone that we have the Slack channel. I don't know if everyone is there already, but we can continue to the conversation there. So I still see that there are some questions and comments in the chat that unfortunately we couldn't discuss together, but we can still continue the conversation in the Slack channel. But I would like to thank you immensely for this fascinating discussion, this fascinating session that was so rich to think about participatory sense making and improvisation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Merci.
Yes.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Yes.
Allez écouter du cello là maintenant.
Yes.
Il dort maintenant.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much.
Really.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Had one announcement at the end. Do we have a title, an end slide, I think, for our next session? There we go. Okay, well, thanks again, everyone. And we'll be meeting back here. We have a few weeks break again, so we'll be meeting back here, same place, same time on Wednesday, the 28th for our next session. So May 28th. So you're all welcome back, including our guest speakers. And these are just a few of the upcoming events that you may be interested in. We have a podcast episode coming out with Evan Thompson. We have a big Mind Matters Gaia series talk with a wonderful science writer from the US who'll be talking about his new book on May 22nd. And there's the Varela International Symposium. So I know many of you are very plugged into the work and legacy of Varela and Enaction and participatory sense making, which very much comes from the tradition of Enaction. So you can sign up for this as a hybrid event. You can sign up online. And this year's theme will be Sentience and Intelligence, AI, the More Than Human, and Us. And just one final quick announcement. It's not on the slide here, but Ida did mention her experience at the Esri last year. So we have an in-person summer school, which lasts 5 days, and it takes place in Tuscany in early August. And it's sort of a blend between an academic conference and an experiential retreat. So if you're interested in applying, there's still time to apply. There's just a few more days actually to apply, May 17th. So feel free to check that out. That's another way of continuing the experience of collective sense making together, and this time in person. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Letitia, for your beautiful hosting. And thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Scott. This was just a vibrant, riveting session. So have a really nice evening, everyone. And we'll see you back in a few weeks.
Merci. Merci tout le monde.
Merci beaucoup. Bonne soirée.
Merci.
Merci.
Thank you so
Au
much.
revoir. Thank you.
you.
Grazie.